My Hero Academia episode 76 of season 4 just aired, and fans are completely blown away by the animation and this fight between Deku at 100% versus Overhaul. Now, just a few episodes ago, we got Lemillion versus Overhaul, which was a highly anticipated fight, and many fans felt left down. There was a lot of still frames and a lot of arguing going on Twitter about the consistency of this series. Now, just a couple episodes later, with the fight between Deku and Overhaul, fans are losing their minds at this just unbelievable, unfathomable god tier animation. Now, this animation was done by Yutaka Nakamura, one of the most famous animators in the world. In my opinion, probably the best animator in the world. He's done scenes like this one, and this one, and this one. And most of the notable scenes in My Hero Academia are actually from Yutaka Nakamura. Now, Nakamura is an expert, and he's such a genius at animation because he's always able to come up with something new and fresh. His style is incredibly unique, and he's always pushing the boundaries of traditional 2D animation, especially the way the cameras rotate, the way the characters move, the amount of frames used for certain different dynamic aspects and angles of each shot. And that's what we're gonna do in this video, is we're gonna break down some of these amazing scenes that went down in this episode and explain what the thinking is and what the concept is behind this animation, because so much more went into this than you could possibly imagine. When you slow down the footage to frame by frame and you analyze and see exactly what Nakamura is doing, it's gonna blow your mind. So let's jump in with the first scene here. So first, at 100% speed, we get this really awesome animation. There's so much power behind this as Deku's in the air and he's charging up a punch to use against Overhaul. Okay, so let's slow this down to frame by frame. Take a look at the scenery and take a look at the smears on the arm, the blurs, and especially, I think the coolest thing here is how the world is turning and the camera is turning around Deku's arm. Take a look at these smears that happen so fast that your brain can't even recognize it. A red impact frame there out of nowhere just to add power. The lightning surging all over his arm, but simultaneously, the camera is bending as the world beneath him is spinning. And that gives this just really cool effect of this high speed action going on with all of the power and this distortion of reality almost because of all of that power and just the way that the animation is done. This is incredibly high skilled, and that's part of the reason that this punch feels so powerful. It's fluid, it's a lot of frames, you have dynamic camera, you have a dynamic foreshortening of the art of just simply the arm. You've got constant different varying effects going on depending on the angle. You've got random impact frames for no reason, just to add more pop and burst, I guess, to the lightning and the power. And as Deku pulls his arm closer to him, we're gonna see the camera lift up and circle around, so now it's facing almost towards his front. Now we get to see the full image of Deku as he's really pulling back that arm. So they're showing how as he's pulling back that arm, he's like ripping all of this power back, and when he throws that punch, it clashes with just this unbelievable magnitude of power. But before we get into the punch, he has to throw this fist first, and as he starts to throw the fist, we get this variety of beautiful impact frames, which we're going to get into here in just a second. Notice how dynamic these impact frames are. A single fist, a silhouette, the fist exploding out in light, and then propelling backwards and then forwards again, and then all, like, there's just so much going on here. Impact frames require a lot of creativity, and they're actually not that easy to pull off. They require a lot of testing, because sometimes you'll do a bunch of impact frames in succession like that and it just won't feel fluid. But sometimes, in this case, it feels super fluid with minimal use of the stars, with varying speeds in and out, with the different shades of black and white that they combined to give you this just beautiful and smooth burst of power and momentum. Just this charge up of energy, because all of that energy is about to land right in Overhaul's face. Impact frames are not 100% necessary all the time. They're definitely appreciated among artists. Now, if you overuse them, it can kind of hurt the animation a little bit. So timing is critical, and also just the fluidity of those impact frames is very, very critical. I give tons of credit to any artist that can do like 10 to 20 impact frames in a row and make it feel seamlessly fluid, which is something that Nakamura seems to be able to do with ease. Now, this punch that Deku throws turns into this just mountain of gigantic fists of energy that pummel Overhaul like crazy. So real quick to break this one down, pretty much what's happening is in the very beginning, we're getting kind of a slow-mo shot. The background of the sky darkens to emphasize these fists that come out of nowhere. If you see these fists basically like come from very small to explosion of giant, slowly moving towards the screen, but there's not even just an increase in size. Like as an animation, they could just pretty much just keep scaling those fists up, but they don't even do that. Instead, they redraw every fist, every frame to feel like the energy is moving forward. It's a lot of extra work, definitely makes it feel more impactful. Now, as those punches hit, you can see the different body parts just start to explode chunks of Overhaul off in succession. It's kind of, again, that like delayed reaction physics, but it adds for a really cool element. Now, if we slow it down here, you'll see the way that he makes those punches feel so powerful. As the burst hits and explodes, you're going to see Overhaul's body and the momentum behind the punch force his body parts and his anatomy in different directions. Pieces of his body are going to fly past the screen with tons of smears and blood and blocks flying out in the direction that the punch hit. There's even parts where he'll kind of expand and then burst out as that punch like bubbles him up and blasts him out right here. And then here you can see a punch hitting him in the shoulder, forcing his whole like collarbone and anatomy to force back on his right side before a punch hits him, like I guess in the stomach or the leg there, shifting the weight of his body and his limbs around. Really interesting, and in the end it felt super powerful, especially with the sound design going on there in the background, all of those pops and bursts. It just felt incredibly strong. Okay, so here's the next scene. I love this one. Just slow motion with so much emotion. The display of how the shadows move. Okay, there's a lot to talk about in this scene here. Let's start off first with the very beginning. So as Overhaul is lifting his head up and his eyes are expanding open, they're redrawing this. God, I mean, it must have been like 30 redraws at least. And I love the smears on the broken pieces of his reconstructed body parts that are coming out of the way as he's lifting his head up to expose his fear and terror, showing that Deku is there, the shadow covering his face, the dynamic angle as if the camera is basically at Overhaul's belt looking up towards Deku. And take a look at this lightning just erupting, all this energy flowing from behind Deku and from his fist that he's pulling back in slow motion, with this just unbelievable use of shadows here. His face slowly revealing as he's peeling back that arm, ready for the final blow. You can add a ton of power in animation if before the punch it's all in slow motion and then the punch itself is in high speed. Hajime no Ippo used to do this all the time, and that's how they were able to make those boxing fights seem so powerful. Every punch felt like a nuclear explosion. I love that, and they really pulled it off here. All of that slow motion, all of that suspense, all of those effects and the camera work, everything was building up to this one climactic punch, which Deku hits Overhaul so hard, it explodes his entire reconstructed body. There's this lightning and everything, crazy dynamic angles everywhere. We have to break this one down because so much happens. It's just completely mind-blowing. So let's start with in slow motion and break this down, because more happens than you probably even recognize. Now, if you're wondering why the screen is so dark at a lot of moments here in My Hero Academia, that's because of the whole seizure fiasco that happened with Pokemon back in the day. And now animation companies, there's like some law or something like that where they basically have to dim it. And what they're doing is they're just taking down the exposure of the footage, which really sucks for us that aren't epileptic, but it's something that I guess we just have to deal with. Now, as you see that lightning come out of Deku and kind of just chain all over over Overhaul's body, it begins to just explode the pieces off of him. Nakamura is going to add a ton of impact frames here, obviously, because that's very Nakamura. In and out, like not in a constant way, but just in a fluid way throughout the animation of the attack to just add more power and more power. Like anything he can do to add more strength to this scene, the guy does. Now take a look at the way the wind moves here. I really love this scene. I think this is probably my favorite, just simply because of the way that Deku and Overhaul break through all of this smoke, and then this particular foreshortening dynamic angle here. I absolutely love the way that he did the smoke here. I don't think I've ever seen this in animation, or at least you don't see it too common, but look at the way that he angled the shot so that it's insanely dynamic and foreshortened as they're flying through this funnel of smoke from the punch, with lightning still coming and shattering all over the place. Just so much is happening here. It's like music to your eyes. So after all of this power lands into Overhaul's face, Deku is going to unleash it, punch, and he's actually going to end up flying through Overhaul because of the speed and momentum and force behind the punch and all that energy. So they do a lot of delayed physics in animation to increase power. You can see he flies through, there's a couple frames of nothing happening, and then this just explosion of smoke and deconstructed body that bursts off. That also is a pretty common actually animation tactic from anime, the delayed physics. It adds a ton of power and a really cool moment. This part right here was too short, but I love it. You can see Deku kind of like skating on the rocks. It's like kind of like he's trying to regain his composure after throwing his entire body and every ounce of power he had through Overhaul. But I wish it was a little bit longer. I wish it was a few more frames, but just how dynamic it is so cool. The rocks fly farther than him. The rocks were way behind him, then they fly in front of him, and then he kind of like lands on them and like skates away. Super cool animation right there. I just wish it was a little bit longer, but hey, I'll take it. I'll take any Nakamura animation. So there you have it, guys. That is Deku vs. Overhaul, 100% explained, and man, was that just a blessing of animation for the community. I loved it. Nakamura, as always, is the god. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you like this episode, tell me in the comments below, and I'll see you guys soon for another video. Peace.